Okay. So hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you guys today. I feel like we are among friends, so that's great. So my name is Ophelie. As you can hear from my accent, I'm originally from France. I've been in Israel for the past 3 years, and I've been working in this great field of ours for about 13 years, including several years with the UN and several years in the field, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, including 6 beautiful years in South Sudan with Israel. And I came back from the field about 3 years ago with a certain bitterness towards the profession at first, because it felt as if the work of the international humanitarian and development community had moved further and further away from the essence of the field, meaning the community. And it felt as if our beneficiaries had become our donors, and that all the theoretical concepts behind localization of aid, local ownership, sustainability were almost like empty words. But on the other hand, I was really privileged during my time in the field up to now to work with amazing communities who have been affected by conflict, displacement, poverty. And I realized the true resilience and strength of these people that I was working with. So with this in mind, I established last year, 2019, a best practices firm to kind of research, pilot, scale, and disseminate community-led best practices in that humanitarian development continuum. So it's that in this capacity that I'm here with you guys today, and I will be talking specifically about meaningful community engagement strategies and what it means in practice. So can I start? Yeah, I guess I started. Okay. So we hear a lot about do no harm, and we are all like quite familiar with the terminology. Many of us have probably filled up that do no harm section box in a call for proposal. We all have learned either theoretically or through practice that our activities as humanitarian and development practitioners should not create harm in the communities where we work, meaning should not either exacerbate existing harmful dynamics or create new ones, like new tensions or new inequalities. So we all know about that. However, we still witness too many activities that disrupt the social, economic, cultural, environmental dynamics in the communities where we work. Or we may also be too busy with our own personal or own professional experience, our own assumptions, our own responsibilities, to even realize that our presence and related activities actually undermine community relation and structures. And we also know that one of the core best practice and mitigation strategy to do no harm or to do less harm is precisely meaningful and effective community engagement. So yes, most programs do engage communities, for example, through focus group discussion during the so-called needs assessment. But this level of engagement does not always and does not necessarily lead to meaningful community leadership and genuine, and I insist on the word genuine, localization in practice. So I want to kind of like highlight 3 initial observations that hopefully will lead us throughout the presentations. And those 3 observations are based on my own experience and things that I've witnessed in the field. And I'm happy to discuss them with you further in the Q&A. So first of all, community engagement is too often conducted to meet an external requirement, for example, a donor requirement, like to tick a box, so to speak, rather than to create genuine channels for community decision-making, community leadership. And therefore, we see it can be limited and not necessarily authentic. I mean, many of us, I'm sure, have had to mobilize a certain number of women, men, girls, boys for a focus group discussion to be able to write our report and show our donors that we do engage communities. First observation. Second one, the community engagement processes and its traditional methods that we are using are still very much top-down. So for example, this typical focus group discussion format tends to create that unbalanced relationship between an interviewer, especially if that interviewer is foreigner, and interviewees. So we come, we sit, we collect information with our notebooks, we leave. What happens to the community after that? Question mark. So this approach is precisely one of the reasons why communities have become disenchanted, and I really insist on that word, disenchanted, with that overwhelming humanitarian presence, especially in terms of crisis. We had put together for you guys a testimony from from a person from South Sudan, from a community representative from South Sudan, which is available in the document shared by Yael, who basically is telling us that especially after crisis, communities see a lot of NGOs coming one after the other, asking the same questions, in a very overwhelming manner. So can you imagine yourself and if we put ourselves in the shoes of communities that have been through a traumatic event like a crisis and emergencies, when you're trying to survive and address the needs of your families, and you see foreigners coming or external actors coming every day asking personal questions about your daily lives, about your habits, what do you eat, what do you fear, and then repeat it all over and over again. You can understand that this can be very overwhelming in many aspects. So that's observation number 2. Moving to observation number 3, this is also something I've witnessed many times. The community engagement methods can be sometimes also very complex, very technical, very theoretical, and we take the risk to alienate the communities that we're supposed to work with. I've seen NGOs trying to do a logical framework in a refugee camp with communities, or some academic institution with UN agencies literally trying to share social norm frameworks with communities, and people feel not connected to that. So it does create more distance rather than bringing people together. So those 3 kind of initial challenges or problems, so to speak, that hopefully need to give birth or pave the way to new practices and to be overcome in order to have meaningful engagement. I have prepared a few examples. I'm just going to focus on 1 or 2 because of time constraints, and I'm happy to share more later on or in the Q&As. But what happened when we fail to meaningfully engage communities? One of the examples I like very much, it's borrowed from DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. As you probably know, in the year 2000, 2010, the DRC has been described as the rape capital of the world, with some of the highest prevalence rates and intensity of sexual violence in the world. And as a result, we saw that the international community has injected a lot of money, a lot of funding to support projects aimed at empowering women, combating violence, and so on and so forth. And what happened is that all this money went almost exclusively on programs that were focusing only on women. So whether it was training or in-kind support with in-kind materials, in-kind assistance, some microfinance projects, only on women. So men started feeling that these programs reinforced women at their own expenses. And they started to kind of, reject this kind of approach. And in response to these perceived threats and male vulnerabilities, they started to display aggressive and violent behaviors, including forced access to sex and so on, to reassert sort of their power and authority. So we say that in addition to creating further divides between men and women, those programs perpetuated cycles of violence at home and outside home. So this is, again, a very harmful consequence that could have been avoided if the programs invested enough time to understand the community dynamics, to understand the gender roles, the social norms within that society, in order to do no harm. Other examples I also like to share is borrowed from humanitarian innovation and technologies. For example, a big international organization which was operating in a refugee camp, Rohingya refugee camp in Bangladesh, realized that the sanitation situation was a big problem. Nobody had access to toilets, so they brought very highly high-tech toilets and build them or place them in the camp so that people have access to sanitation services. And then they realized that after building or after placing them, nobody was actually using those toilets, and people continued to defecate outside, putting them at risk at risk of further harm or assaults or health hazards or and related risks. So what happened is that after asking, and they realized that in Islam, it's not allowed to defecate in front of Mecca, and those toilets were built or placed towards the holy sites. So again, this kind of harmful consequences could be avoided if there had been a meaningful community engagement, and also millions of dollars would have been saved. So we see a lot of examples like that. I'm sure you guys have also a lot to share. So in fact, what we realize, which is actually quite interesting, is that the nature of emergencies have changed. They are more protracted and complex than ever before. We see it now with the global health pandemic of COVID-19. In 2020, just for a few figures, 168 million of people are in need of humanitarian assistance, which represent 1 out of 45 people in the world, which is at the highest figure in decades. So there is, yes, also a huge dependency on external aid. In 2019, humanitarian sectors spent almost $30 billion. So there is a lot of, we realize that the nature of emergency, the nature of our work has changed. And as a result, there is a general realization among the international community that what we've been doing up to now is not working so well. It's not so sustainable. And there is a need to find more effective, more sustainable ways to support and work with communities affected by crisis and displacements. One small example is that in 2017, the UN realized that and created that new framework called the New Way of Working, still theoretical, but they basically explained that there is a need for us as humanitarian actors or development actors to work more towards resilience, to maximize local capacity, so we can move away once and for all away from aid dependency. So there's a realization, and I think that we are in an interesting timing. We have a powerful momentum right now in front of us, because of that evident growing need and desire for new best practices to address all the challenges that I've mentioned so far. So it's in a way quite an interesting timing to reflect on best practices. So what can we do? What shall we do to make our community engagement as sustainable, as genuine, as meaningful as possible? So here I want to share with you a set of recommendations that I've organized according to 3 main categories. And the first category is kind of changing the mindset, changing the way we think and do the work that we do. And the first recommendation here is about moving from a needs-based approach to an asset-based approach, to a resilience-oriented approach. What do we mean by that? It's true that when we have to design a program, the first thing that we are told to do, or the first thing that we've learned to do, is to look at the needs. This has created a needs-based approach to humanitarian and development work, meaning we traditionally focus on what's missing, what's wrong, the needs, the vulnerability, the gaps, the fragility, and so on and so forth. And this approach has intimately influenced the way we think and act. And looking exclusively or excessively at the needs, meaning what's not there, what's not working, may make us overlook what actually works. The existing positive coping mechanism, the assets, the potential, the opportunities, the strength, the overall resilience in a community. And in fact, the COVID-19 circumstances really show us that, really illustrate that point. And we've learned a great deal from women and community-based organizations around the world. We used their strengths and coping mechanism to develop innovative, safe, culturally accepted solution to COVID-19. For example, women groups were the first to locally produce and sell masks, soap, water dispensers, and really in a time when many humanitarian practitioners like ourselves could not access the most vulnerable communities, we should realize finally that investing in existing local capacities, in existing assets, solution is the only genuine way, in my opinion, to achieve true resilience. So that's number one. Now I'm moving to the second category of recommendation, which is really, really important when it comes to community engagement. It's really the before, the how do we prepare thoroughly the community engagement and not just pop up with our pen and notebook in a community. Whenever we need to develop a community engagement strategy, it needs a lot of work beforehand. And here I will look at the first recommendation under that category, which is maybe one of the most important recommendations. Before going to engage with communities, we need to reflect on our own assumption, own belief, own identities, and test those assumptions, deconstruct them, and see how they could influence positively, but especially negatively, on the engagement. We saw it in the example with DRC, where the programs assume that in order to help women, we need to focus our work on women. Well, the assumption was wrong. It created a lot of harm. So there is an importance to reflect on that. And here I'm suggesting a very interesting tool, a very interesting exercise that is taken from the Inclusion Toolkit, which I highly recommend to everyone, which kind of helps us analyze where and how we position ourselves as external managers or external researchers, and help us be aware of our own perception and cultural bias. I've put it here. I mean, you can see it, and again, Yael will share all those tools with you. But you can see that this type of exercises that I really recommend to do in a group, as a team with your local partners, helps you explore your identity, your assumption, your belief, and analyze how they could affect how and what participants share. So really, this is something really important to do beforehand. Next recommendation, which is again very much related to how do we come prepared to ensure the best community engagement possible. And here I've selected for you a few exercises that I've organized according to 4 sections or 4 categories. The first one is access. How do we understand the people we want to engage and how we want to access them? And here I suggested a few tools that will help us understand who is affected by the problem or the opportunities that we are analyzing. And also how we are going to access those people, from which angle. For example, the mapping context tool will help us create an engagement plan. It will also help us, very importantly, explore the potential barriers that could prevent us from meaningfully access the people we want to access, and to think creatively how to overcome such barriers. So really kind of understand access. The second part is kind of a combination of tools that will help us better understand the people themselves and kind of help us almost like create a common language, or at least a linkage between them and us, an entry point. And here I really like this tool called the Developing Language Tools that kind of help us brainstorm on what types of messages we want to share and how we want to share those messages. Do I want to share through words, through pictures, through symbols? I know that we are using more and more cards, to assess or understand context. So what types of words, what types of symbols, what types of pictures? So it's really interesting kind of exercises that help us really create that common language. The next category is about preparing the experience, preparing the community engagement experience. And here I'm referring to the testing engagement tool that can help us map the experience of the engagement from the participant perspective. So it's like a customer journey map. You know, it builds a picture of what a participant experiences from the beginning of the engagement through the end. So it's really good for planning purposes, and it can help us anticipate risk and challenge. And that leads me also to another really important exercise to do as a team before is an analysis of potential risk and identification of mitigation strategies of the engagement, specifically of the engagement. And then finally, how do we explore, how do we analyze the potential effects of this engagement? So the mapping potential tool, in that sense, will help us explore the potential benefits of the participation process. Who can benefit from it? What can participant get out of it? And in fact, if you remember when I mentioned before the general fatigue of communities vis-a-vis needs assessment, this could be really interesting, because if we reflect beforehand on what can participant gain out of engaging with us, we might find entry points and creative solution to make the engagement more meaningful and more trustworthy. So basically, this is kind of a very rapid overview of creative ways to really prepare among ourselves to ensure that the community engagement is as meaningful and effective as possible. Now I'm moving to the last category, which is the engagement itself. So, you know, the first category was the mindset, you know, thinking differently. The second was preparing the community engagement. And now we are going to the engagement itself. And here the first recommendation from this category is that it's really, really important, as we saw from the examples, to do a context assessment, okay? Or context assessment or context analysis. And that must include at least the following consideration, and should be conducted, very, very important, throughout the program, not just at the beginning for that so-called needs assessment, not at the end for the evaluation, but throughout. And by the way, when I say throughout, all the different elements that I'm about to describe can be very well integrated into routine activities. It can be integrated in a woman activity, into a training, into a youth group. So it's not being perceived as something coming from outside or an exercise of data collections solely. No, it can also be perceived as a fun activity, creative activities to build trust, to start a discussion. So the very important consideration to really highlight in that context assessment is first a do no harm analysis. Sometimes it's also called conflict sensitivity analysis, whatever. And here it's about kind of identifying questions, or even better, activities that will help us understand the connectors and the dividers into a specific communities. For example, a safety audit. Safety audits is kind of an exercise that we use to understand how communities perceive safety and security matters. So for example, if you're an NGO and you're about to do a distribution, a food distribution or any type of distribution, you want to understand where people feel safe, where people don't feel safe, so that you can plan accordingly. You can use this tool, or you can do a map and then ask the communities to put a red dot where they feel unsafe or a green dot where they feel safe, and kind of really play around in a participatory manner to really grasp the safety dynamics in a specific setting. So this is why also questions like frontal question may not necessarily lead to the best answers, and it's good to also integrate a drawing or collage and mapping to have a more horizontal communication process. Number two, diversity and inclusiveness assessment. Really, really important to kind of help you understand that different social and demographic groups have different needs, different opportunities, different strengths. So it's important to really also have some ways to reflect that, especially when it comes with when it comes to people with disability, the elderly, displaced populations, single mothers, adolescent girls, any types of groups that might have different again, needs a different routine, different perceptions. And here, for example, a good tool to do that is an experience mapping. Experience mapping is kind of like a journey mapping, and you can do it, for example, to if you work on WASH, in water sanitation and hygiene, and you want to understand how people access toilet, you do a journey mapping with a let's say a 30-year-old male. He'll tell you how he goes to the bathroom and what does he need, and then you do the same journey mapping with a person with disability or an adolescent girl or a single mom, and then you'll see they have different barriers, different needs, different coping mechanism, different strengths, and that will help you as a result to adapt your program and your engagement strategy accordingly. Third, very important, is the gender and social norms analysis, which is again kind of questions or activities that help you analyze and understand the power relations between men and women, and how the activities will affect either positively or negatively those gender roles and those social norms, like we saw with the DRC example. So here, an example of a really cool activity to do to understand that is the resource flow, which is kind of like a different cards, and on the cards you have different symbols, going back to symbols and images, and then you can ask women in a women group as part of a routine activity to see how their how the resources are being allocated at home, what is being prioritized, we bring the resources, who spend what. And it kind of like really help you understand, especially if you do a livelihood programs, the economic dynamic within a household. So basically, just kind of to wrap up that specific recommendation, is that this combined methodology is really, really important to help you understand the full context and analyze the economic, the social, the cultural, the political, the humanitarian, the environmental dynamics, and help you assess potential risks and vulnerabilities and identify your mitigation strategy accordingly. So really, again, I think that I just gave you a few examples about a few examples of tools and exercises that can be really integrated into your daily activities. So it will not just be a good method to collect information and collect data, but it will also be a good method to build trust and to create a dialogue. And again, because it's really participatory and very horizontal, you don't have this frontal top-down approach that we may see in interviews. So that's for this recommendation. Now moving to the next one. Okay, so this is really, really important as well. So we talked about, now I talked about the context assessment, which you can call it needs opportunity assessment. I think this kind of needs assessment or this context assessment, when you do it from the beginning, that at the beginning of a program, it's an excellent opportunity, not just to collect information and understand needs and opportunities, but it's also a way to start planning the program with the people. And this is really, really important. So you have, you have your list of questions or your list of activities, and then at the end or throughout, you can also kind of start seeing how people prioritize programs. For example, you give them like cards with different, that represent different activities, and ask them to prioritize which activities will be more meaningful to them according to A, B, C. And then you can already include them in the prioritization process and the program design. So your need assessment, so to speak, also is or becomes a program design, a participatory program design tool. Of course, this needs to be done while managing expectation and explaining, what can be done, what cannot be done, and so on and so forth. And the last recommendation of this is about making sure the community-based mechanisms are included in the program. So it means that it's not just about engaging communities at all levels. It's not just about that. It's also about including within the programs channels and mechanisms that can be led by the communities, because communities should also lead decisions and processes that concern them. That's really, really important, that it's not just community-centered, also community-led. So here I recommend particularly including, for example, a program committee composed of representatives from faith-based organization and community-based organization and whatever stakeholders are important in the specific settings, so that they can be in charge of reviewing from a community perspective how the program is going and reporting back on a monthly basis. That's number one. Another example could be a very important feedback, complaints, and accountability mechanism integrated into the program. I know, again, some organizations just want to tick a box and put, you know, a box where a suggestion box, which is completely ridiculous. I've seen that in Takuma. But no, meaningful feedback mechanism, like, for example, identifying a focal point within the community that will be the bridge between the communities and the NGOs. And we can, you know, reflect back on what the community, like complaints or feedback or perception of the communities. And finally, I think that really, really important that the process that you do as a team to understand the context and all the different tools that I mentioned, it's important to do it as a team, but also, and then to do it with your local partner, and then to do it also with the community, so that the program design process is, so to speak, decentralized, and the ownership can be maintained throughout the chain, so to speak. So that's all for now. I think that we have, in conclusion, I think we have a really interesting, we face a really interesting timing where there is a strong need for new best practices to promote genuine community engagement. And I think this is also part of the reason why OLAM is doing this series, to kind of help us also reflect on what works and what doesn't work, so that we can adapt our thinking, our conceptualization, but also our practice, and redefine our roles to make community engagement more meaningful and more sustainable. So I put my, I'm available afterwards for questions. I put my details, and then at the end, there's a list of resources that I really recommend you to review, and it includes all the different exercises and tools that I've mentioned. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.